Enduro is interesting though too, because that's the newest thing, and really enduro is it's a race format, and just like cross country racing yields the lightest, fastest, most efficient bikes, and downhill has spawned, World Cup downhill has spawned some of the most technically advanced suspension bikes we have, the most capable bikes. The enduro category has really been they've taken an all mountain bike and it's gone to a perverse level. Like they've taken a normal, what we call a trail or all mountain bike, and they've pushed the angles and they've pushed the geometry and they've pushed the way that's ridden to work in that racing format, which is an elite level World Cup racing format. And so, you have these graduated steps between cross country up to trail, up to all mountain, and then enduro. And really, in my mind, enduro is that, it's more of that thoroughbred all mountain bike that's built for racing, whereas the all mountain bike and the trail bikes, that's kind of your all around bread and butter. Like that's where most of the consumers sit.
You're talking about, when you talk about enduro, XC, and trail, like purpose and design intent is like the huge thing. You're talking about these thoroughbred race bikes. You're probably not going to get quite as big of a range of tire fit or, places to put bottles. You start talking about bags, because like you kind of know what you need for those races. It's kind of been determined over time what works, what wins. And then trails, like there's so much versatility. You may be going on a really long ride. You might just be running laps somewhere at your local trail. And like I think that's where trail, if you're looking at product, you're getting different feature sets. You're getting more versatility. You're getting more options, especially when we've had like this whole phase coming in with Plus, and like people want to swap out either wheel sets, even different wheel sizes. Like, in the enduro and XC, it's kind of like, this is kind of race proven stuff.
It's a good point. You're not seeing Plus bikes on the enduro
the EWS
World Series.
Well, what's interesting to me about enduro is that, like Pete said, downhill and XC, the program is pretty specific. Where enduro, like the whole point of it is these stages where you're doing downhill or portions of downhill runs and then portions of XC runs. And so those bikes are drawing from the development from, if it's a big company, from the development of the roadside for wheels and frames and to get the bikes as pedally as possible, and DH performance. And if they can meld that together, it seems like it's a real development center for bikes right now. Like DH is so specific. It's like, it's been specific. I know trails are changing, but like enduro is like, not only do I need to make up time on this rocky downhill section, but I need to make up time pedaling. I need to do all this and that. So the bikes are like the culmination of XC and all this stuff together. So they end up being, like you said, like a very expensive all mountain bike. It's like, it's an all mountain bike. You ride it all over the mountain, but you're paying extra money to have the lightest wheels, the stiffest wheels, the most traction, the most travel, the most everything. And I'd say like the design of them right now is maybe more interesting than DH bikes, just because it's like, whoa, look at those head tube angles. Look at how dynamic it is right now. Like you have a bunch of world-class ex-DH racers racing it. Mm-hmm. Hyper talented people.
If you want to say, well, what's the difference between an all mountain bike and an enduro bike? I would say it really has to do with those angles, especially that head angle, the amount of mechanical trail on the bike. The downhill, or the enduro bike, the thoroughbred enduro race bikes are going to be really slack, like almost downhill slack. And the all mountain bikes are going to be more in that 66 to 67 range if you're talking about a 27.5. And 29 even now, we're pushing into that 67, 66 category. There's some 150 travel 29ers that have 66-degree head angles.
So depending on someone's background, an enduro or all mountain bike, if they're more comfortable with DH or motorcycles, they might be more pumped on an enduro rig. And if they're coming from maybe an XC background, they might be more pumped on a little bit steeper all mountain or more, you'd call it general use.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I would say the all mountain bike or the long travel trail bikes, there's still some considerations and some emphasis on climbing.
Yeah.
And being able to go uphill with those. And it gets a little sticky because you say, well, hey, Pete, like enduro, half the race is going uphill. And it's like, well, yes, but it's they're only timed on the downhill. They need the bike to be able to pedal uphill in terms of being efficient and in terms of saving energy for the downhill. Whereas that all mountain bike or that long travel trail bike is going to be a little more suited for climbing as a part of the experience. The part of the ride you're going to do, you may be focused on the descent. That's like the reward or the primary purpose of going out to ride, but you know you have to climb to ride.
Yeah. Well, compared to, you know, a park bike, which is a genre that's almost gone away, because you have a bike with as much travel and the same angles that you can actually pedal up a hill
Well,
in an enduro
I
rig.
think the park bike's making a resurgence.
Yeah, I
Well,
would say
the
park bike's not dead yet.
The park bike is being replaced by the single crown enduro bike.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
They used to be they'd take a downhill chassis, they'd flip a chip and knock the wheel travel from 200 down to 180, and you'd still run your dual crown fork on it. And now the enduro bikes are so good. This is, you know, we have 180 millimeter single crown forks that are insanely light, you know, compared to where we came from with like the Marzocchi 6.6, like that first 150 mil single crown fork. I had one of those things. It was a beast. It was
Yes.
like 8.5 pounds, you know, for a single crown fork. And now we have a 180 mil travel single crown fork. So like, I think the enduro bike actually it's a refined version of a park bike, if you want to think of it that way, because of what the racing genre has done to help refine that bike.
Because you had to pedal it up
Yep.
to get down.
So what's the difference between, what makes the competitive enduro different than like competitive cross country?
Well, stages for one, like the rules of that of like is similar.
Well, the format's different, but like mentality wise, like why is one person
Personality.
drawn to enduro versus?
Well, right now it's downhill racing with a transit stage in between. So it's, you know, the tracks are kind of aggressive and gnarly enough that downhill riders are excelling at it. There's companies that have formerly focused marketing dollars on downhill that are focusing marketing dollars on enduro right now. And that's, to a certain extent, driving the culture, where it's essentially downhill racing with pedaling is kind of what it's evolved to right at the moment, in my opinion.
Or what makes the enduro race format appealing is that race format can be extremely laid back. Unlike, I don't want to say all cross country events are like very serious and like really tight, but that enduro format can be super laid back and super loose. And part of what makes it cool right now as a young growing sport is like it has come from a very grassroots level. Whereas like the cross country, it's like, it's got a 20, 30 year establishment, you know, going back all the way to the Norma days. Like cross country there's a certain amount of pomp and circumstance that comes when you talk about an XC cross country race, and a certain amount of organization. Mm-hmm. And what I think is cool and appealing about an enduro race right now is that, people are competing at a World Cup level, highly organized, highly sanctioned, but it's also happening at a grassroots level, and it appeals to that different rider that isn't into all the super organized, heavy-handed cross-country racing that you see a lot of.
But it's also like timed racing versus like head-to-head. So you're not racing in a pack. You know, you get on your own time to the next place, getting in line, doing your run, maybe taking a break, maybe not, depending on how loose the race is. But it's not like 40 people signing up and bolt into the first thing and then following everyone in the line. It's like, yeah, you know, I got my thing, take my helmet off, take a break, roll, like do my thing. And there's 3 or 4 different courses. So like I might lose time on this one, but make time on that one, like gave it in Duluth, you know? So it's like, it's kind of
So when you're
sweet.
talking about that personality, what you've distinguished it a bit from like XC, like, you know, what makes that person different than full-on downhill racer? Like what's the
Well,
difference? Because when I think about that, a bunch of
interesting.
a crew of people that wants to get rad, but they're kind of into competition. That's kind of where I go with downhill too. But there's like, I still think there's something different about the
I think at
enduro racer or rider.
The grassroots level, though, there isn't. There's a ton of overlap.
Yeah.
I think the same guys that show up for a downhill race are the same guys that show up for a lot of them are the
Agreed.
same guys that show up
Yeah.
for the enduro race.
I think the program of enduro is a little bit more suited to grassroots too, because DH, as we see it on TV, is just gnarly. It's gnarly. Very
Yeah,
few
it's
people can
just
do
high
that.
risk.
versus like what even local DH trails are more like enduro trails. So it's like the speeds are a little bit higher, the tracks are a little bit smoother. People are wearing open face helmets than enduro sometimes, you know, so it's like, it's a little bit more attainable, and which is not the end of the world.
I think a lot of the grassroots level enduro racing too is on a more of a mixed bag of terrain. Whereas like the World Cup level enduro tracks are pretty gnarly. Like, I rode the course they did in Whistler a couple years ago, and it was like one of the steepest things I'd ridden off the mountain ever. It's crazy. But I think at other grassroots level, the trails are, it's more basically like chopping up your local ride into sections and timing yourself. And so the participants in a local enduro, you're not racing on like super gnarly, aggressive downhill tracks. You're just riding on regular trail. And so then your fitness level or your ability level, it's a little more of an even playing field because the trails aren't quite as gnarly at that like grassroots level. Mm-hmm. And I think that appeals to a lot of people, you know.
And you might need a little bit less specific gear for an enduro too. Obviously to excel, you'll need really nice stuff, but you don't need to buy full guards and a full face and a DH bike and everything that you probably won't use anywhere but that one trail.
But what does enduro drink then?
That's why I'm not saying
Well,
enduro.
Just
enduro all
champagne,
mountain.
Rocks, dude.